Yo, what's going on, guys? Crispy Flakes here. Welcome to Extra Crispy, man. This right here is exactly what YouTube was built on, okay, man? This is the type of videos that I get up for, man. The most overrated player on every NBA team. Video by Hoops Reference. Now, I was sitting here thinking as I was setting up the video recording here, I can't think of a single player that I could consider overrated on the Detroit Pistons. Like, I'm actually flabbergasted if he's going to be able to come up with one here, man. Like, you can't really say Marvin Bagley. The dude's shooting 53%, in his bag. Don't call him Lee. Killian Hayes has been nice. It's like, I can't really think of an overrated player. So, first video is East, second is West. We're going to do it all in one video here. Check out Hoops Reference channel. Let's get it, my friend.
Every year, a lot changes in the NBA world as new teams emerge at the top, new players break out, and plenty of intriguing storylines present themselves to follow.
Maybe we'll say Sadiq Bey.
He was on the team at some point. Or may not actually be accurate. Most players are viewed a certain way by the general public because of either what they have previously done or what they could potentially become.
Or
but when
flashiness.
the idea of these players starts to become greater than what the players are in reality, then they become a bit overrated, and that brings us to today's video. In each of my next two videos, I'm going to be going through every team in the NBA, identifying the most overrated player from each squad. With today's video going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, and tomorrow's video going through the Western Conference. Now, before we start, I need to preface this by saying that being included on these lists does not mean I think these players are bad.
No, man, it means they're bad, bro. They're bad. They're garbage. They're a trash can, man. A trash can ops.
They actually are. Before we start, though, it turns out a good amount of you watching...
We're going all in this video!
...channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it.
Who's first?
That being said,
Who's first?
Let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll start off with the Atlanta Hawks, and the most overrated player for them is Dejounte Murray. Murray made his first All-Star game last season when he was the go-to guy for a rebuilding Spurs team, so the Hawks traded for him in the offseason, hoping to pair him with Trae Young in the backcourt and elevate them back.
Which kind of says a lot.
The exact opposite happened, as the Hawks have arguably regressed from last year to this year.
I'm gonna go. You know what? I'm going full on here, man. Trae Young. Trae Young is the Kevin Love T-Wolves version of point guards, man.
Been able to replicate his production on a team with actual winning aspirations. Up next is the most overrated player on their team is probably Jason Tatum. Now, I'll start off by saying that obviously Tatum is one of the league's superstars, but the degree to which he gets praise often gets taken too far by fans and the media alike. Year in and year out, especially this year though, people are so eager to try to force Tatum into top 5 players in the league conversations and MVP races, but he's just not on that level yet. Scoring 30 points a game is great, but he's not the most efficient in doing so, and his production isn't as well balanced as other top-tier superstars that he gets compared to.
We just started.
Next up is the Brooklyn Nets, and their most overrated player right now is Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I know my man Who's Reference. Man, I had a whole entire essay written about Ben Simmons on this one. Dude's a big Philly fan.
After all of the trades, it was hard to find someone who was truly overrated on this Nets team, so Ben Simmons got the nod by default.
No, he's overrated
anyway.
When
he was first traded there, people were saying that the Nets fleeced the 76ers in the trade. And while most have come around to the realization that Simmons is not quite as good as originally thought, I think there is still a lot of optimism about his potential despite his complete unwillingness to work towards it or adjust. Injuries are also holding him back, which is unfortunate.
He's got a bad attitude.
When he's been healthy, he now just looks like a shell of his former self. Up next is the Charlotte Hornets, and their most overrated player is LaMelo Ball. Ball is the team's best player by far, but he has a lot of growing to do if he ever wants to lead a team that can consistently compete and win games. LaMelo shoots the ball a lot, as he's one of 14 players this year taking 20
He's fun, but he's
game,
not efficient.
But he scores the fewest points of those 14 players, because he's the least efficient of the bunch.
Yeah.
He has great court vision and passing talent, and dishes out a bunch of assists, but that doesn't necessarily
mean
he's
Globetrotters.
Making the right read or the right play, so while his production looks all-star caliber on paper, he doesn't quite impact winning as much as other guards around him at his skill
He's like
level.
Brett Favre.
Up
Takes
next
a lot of
is
risks.
the Chicago Bulls, and
Sometimes
their
they pan
most
out.
overrated player is Nikola Vucevic. The Bulls have
All
struggled.
right, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, Bulls fans. I'm genuinely curious. I haven't caught a ton of Bulls games this season. How is Patrick Williams doing? I think, like, has he flourished into, like, that next guy yet, or is he still kind of, like, in that role player type of
their status
realm?
as a playoff contender this year after breaking their playoff drought last season, and a big reason why is Vucevic slowing down since his all-star caliber play when they first acquired him. His numbers may look similar to what they were last year, but defensively, Vucevic has been poor, and the Bulls as a whole
he's just
performed
a center that
points better
exists
with him off of the court. Next up is the
Caris
Cleveland
LeVert.
Cavaliers, and their most overrated player is Caris LeVert.
Baby
LeVert
Durantula.
has a flashy play style, so when you watch highlights, you're left thinking he's a better player than he actually is, because he's capable of hitting tough shots and dishing out nice passes that catch the eye, but the reality is he's a 12-point scorer with mediocre efficiency splits and questionable defensive instincts, and at 28 years old, he's not going to be taking any big leaps individually.
Nah.
Up next is the Detroit Pistons, and
whoa! Man, James Wiseman has been a bucket. Let's hear his reasoning.
their most overrated player is James Wiseman. Wiseman is a young player that a lot of people want to see do well for a variety of reasons, and there's nothing wrong with that. But ever since the Warriors traded him to Detroit, there has been a lot of victory laps being ran by fans and media, despite the fact that it's way too premature. Wiseman is scoring about 13 points and grabbing 9 rebounds a game in his time in Detroit, which is solid production, but he's doing it for the worst team in the NBA. Going even further, when he was on the Warriors, the team performed a whopping 20 points worse with him on the court, and now in Detroit, who are already bad enough, the team is performing 5 points worse with him on the court compared to when he's on the bench, and one of the biggest reasons is because he still has a long way to go defensively regarding his discipline and rotations.
Hey, once we get Cade Cunningham back, though, he's dishing that ball into James Wiseman, a little pick and pop, pick and roll action. No, okay, so Hoops isn't being disrespectful. He's just saying he wants to see more. So that's a good answer. That's a good answer. It's like when you talk about overrated, you gotta say something, right? So that's a good answer. I'm not angry about that. That's good.
And he's still been detrimental in that regard.
Okay.
Next up is the Indiana Pacers, and their most overrated player is Buddy Hield. The Pacers are another team that didn't necessarily have many options for this topic, but Hield gets slightly overrated when trade discussions come up. He was rumored to be wanted by the Lakers, and proposals
He's like in his late 30s now, isn't he?
First-round picks and some extra on top of it, and I just don't know if Hield is worth
He was
that
an old head
much.
rookie.
He's an outstanding shooter, but a flawed overall creator, and defensively he leaves a lot to be desired as well. Up next is the Miami Heat, and their most overrated player is Tyler Herro. Last year, Herro emerged as the winner of the Sixth Man of the Year award, and this year he's been elevated to the starting lineup as the shooting guard, but that change has actually resulted in both him and the Heat team taking a step backward. His scoring and efficiency have decreased a little bit this year, and the Heat as a team went from the 12th ranked offense last year to the 25th.
You never had any of the greatest sixth man of all time ever complain about wanting to start because they knew how valuable their role was on the bench and it led to winning, man. Look at Manu Ginobili. How many rings did that man have? You know, Tyler Herro should have just stayed on the bench, man. You were thriving there. You were thriving, bro. The Heat they were doing great.
This year, Herro is probably best served as a sixth man to ignite being a bench player. Bench, but he's viewed as a player that's capable of more. Next up is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their most overrated player is Jrue Holiday. Holiday is an outstanding lead guard who defends the perimeter as well as anyone, but the reason why he has become overrated is the fact that he was named an all-star this season over quite a few others that were having better seasons.
That's a fair statement. I think he should have made it.
Sixers and Jalen Brunson of the Knicks have both been unbelievable this year, but Holiday got the nod over both, which is something that I just cannot get behind.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Up next is the New York Knicks, and their most overrated player is RJ Barrett. Since he's been drafted, he's been someone expected to be a future star in the making, and after taking a step forward last season, he's begun to regress a bit this year. While the team overall has improved a ton as a solidified playoff team, Barrett is slowly seeing his minutes decrease as the season comes to an end, and it's because he's still way too inconsistent as a scorer and a decision maker. Next up is the Orlando Magic, and their most overrated player is Bull.
Should have been a
The
Piston.
Bull phenomenon caught steam this season when he finally started playing regular rotation.
It was fun.
All of
It
a
was
sudden,
fun.
the takes about him being a star in the making have returned. But now that the season is almost over, we've seen the fact that he's just a 9-point scorer who can knock down some shots from deep but not consistently, and while his length and craftiness are great, his scrawniness gets taken advantage of. Up next is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their most overrated player is Tobias Harris. Harris is being paid max contract money to perform like a decent fourth option at best, and until that contract expires, it will continue
What is
to
it, like
hold the
45
76ers
million?
back from maximizing their assets. He scores about 15 points on above-average efficiency, which isn't bad, but he's not a decisive playmaker or a willing spot-up shooter, which is more of what the team needs around Joel Embiid and James Harden. Next up is the Toronto
Scottie
Raptors,
Barnes.
and their most overrated player is Scottie
Yo,
Barnes.
Raptor fans are
After
gonna
winning
be-
the Rookie of the Year award last
Gonna be
season,
angry.
word on the street is that Barnes was completely untouchable in trade talks, and the team wouldn't have even given him up for a player like Kevin Durant.
I do
in a
remember
trade.
that. I still don't blame
he
him.
hasn't really shown any improvement at all this season, and while he's a very good defensive player, he still has a long way to go offensively.
Scottie's going to be like Sean Marion.
And finally, the last team in the East is the Washington Wizards,
Real deal
and their
Bradley
most
Beal.
overrated player is Bradley Beal. Beal got paid a hefty supermax deal by the Wizards this offseason, which turned a lot of heads. And when you're being
Who'd
paid
I say was Kevin Love of point guards? Trae Young. Bradley Beal would be the Kevin Love of shooting guards. He needs to be a third option on a championship team.
kind of money, the expectation is for you to perform like a superstar, but Beal just simply is not that. The reality is that he's a borderline all-star caliber guy who isn't good
Nice
enough to be
dunk,
the
though.
best
Wow.
player on a team that
Extension.
hopes to contend, and unfortunately, the Wizards have locked themselves into mediocrity by committing that much capital to him. And with that being said,
All right, guys,
all I
that's the end of the East right there. We're moving on to the Western Conference. Oh, Taco Bell, man. What's your favorite thing from Taco Bell? I really never say no to a chicken quesadilla. Just don't.
Let's begin.
I don't. It's always
We'll
on
be
the
going
go-to.
in alphabetical order, so the first team up is the Dallas
Christian
Mavericks,
Wood.
and their most overrated player is Christian
I'm happy
Wood.
he's not in Detroit.
Wood is a
I'm
highly
happy.
skilled big man on offense who spaces the floor decently
We got
well
our
and
team.
is a pretty good partner for Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving in the pick and roll, but his defense is very worrisome.
who's that dude
and
with
the
all the
Mavericks
hair, man? Oh, it's
perform
Josh Giddey.
almost 3 points worse with him on the court.
Got a head
His
of hair
numbers
on
on
him.
paper are objectively good, and he's a productive player to have off the bench, but the Mavericks have fallen off of a cliff this year defensively, and Wood has definitely
You guys aren't going to
contributed.
believe this. I saw on Twitter Bill Simmons, the Bill dude. He said that he predicts that LeBron James and Draymond Green are going to join Kyrie and Luka on the Mavericks. What a horrible fit across the board. Horrible fit. That is not going to work.
To that. Next up is the Denver Nuggets, and their most overrated player is Michael Porter Jr. Porter Jr. is a very talented
How do we be
scorer
a
who is
superstar?
ready to shoot the ball on a moment's notice, and there isn't a shot that he sees that he doesn't like. He's scoring about 17 points per game this year incredibly efficiently from
Trade him
both
for
the field
Tobias.
and from three,
This
and
actually
he
would be a good
benefits
trade.
from playing alongside Nikola Jokic, who sets him up for good looks regularly, but his defense is starting to cause some concerns as the playoffs approach, and the Nuggets coaching staff has even gone as far as experimenting with different lineups and giving him fewer minutes. Next up is the Golden State
Poole.
Warriors, and their most overrated player is Jordan Poole. Poole broke out last
Poole's fun,
season,
that's
and
about
because
it.
of the fact that his playstyle is incredibly flashy and fun, he was quickly starting to
Oh, my bad.
attract a
Just
big
got all messed up. Hopefully it hasn't been like this the entire time, man. Yo, it probably has been, hasn't it? Oh, my goodness, man. My apologies, guys. It's all fixed now. Hopefully it's just that
fan base.
one.
He was being called the next Splash Brother, and the Warriors in the offseason even chose to commit to him with a long-term max contract extension, but in hindsight, I'm not quite sure he's a max-level player. He's scoring about 20 points this year, but his shot selection is pretty questionable, and he shoots below average efficiency-wise while struggling as a defender.
He is kind of a Walmart
Up
Curry,
next
which isn't a
is the
bad
Houston
thing, but not a great
Rockets,
thing
and
either.
their most
Kevin Porter.
overrated player is Kevin Porter Jr. The Rockets are not only a rebuilding team losing a lot of games, but the brand
Rocket fans, they wanted to fight for this man right here. They were all about that Kevin Porter, Jalen Green backcourt. But I really think that I still like Kevin Porter. I see him as a scorer off the bench. I see him as a sixth man. I think that's a great role for him, and this team could keep Kevin Porter for that role, but also get Scoot Henderson. I think you do that every single time, because then you have a guy right here that can come in and play for either guy in the backcourt, can handle the ball or play off ball would be perfect.
Of basketball that they play has come under fire quite a bit, as they've been labeled by some as an AAU team-esque style that they play, and Kevin Porter Jr. definitely contributes to it. They lack structure, the brand of basketball is pretty selfish, and despite the production looking good on paper for him,
James
it
Harden.
is more than likely pretty hollow.
He better pass it these
Next
days.
up is the Los Angeles Clippers, and
Willing
their
passer,
most
I should say.
overrated player is Bones Hyland. Hyland is yet another example of a player with a pretty fun and flashy play style, and when he makes a highlight, everyone's talking about it and starting to say things like he deserves more minutes, but while he's capable of making those big plays, he still has way too many flaws. He is genuinely one of the worst defensive players in the NBA, and he's far too
I do like Bones Hyland, but I will say he does give me Reggie Jackson vibes. Like, he's a point guard that would be on your team, but he's not your long-term solution. He's just he's like one of those, like, you know, if you go to like a buffet or something, and you know you are getting your main dish on the buffet, but you want some dessert. You know, my buddy Frank, he has something called a transition dish, where he gets, you know, half plate of food and half plate of dessert, and that's kind of what this man is right here. He's the transition plate. So that's okay,
consistent
though.
on offense to justify
It gets you to
trusting
the
with a
end
big role
eventually.
at this point in time. Up next is the Los Angeles Lakers, and their most overrated player is D'Angelo Russell. When Russell Westbrook was the team's point guard, he got blamed for a lot of the team's issues, and while he's not blameless in the matter, he was often scapegoated way too much.
I might go AD.
Bringing in D'Angelo Russell to replace him on the Lakers has made the fans optimistic again, but Russell isn't the massive upgrade that many think he is, as his weaknesses as a consistent decision maker and defender were two of the biggest gripes they had with Westbrook. Next up is the Memphis Grizzlies, and their most overrated player is Dillon Brooks. Brooks has been making headlines for all of the wrong reasons lately, as he somehow finds a way to beef with players on every single team that the Grizzlies play. He's an instigator with a lot to say, and his play doesn't quite back his words up. He's a poor shooter of the ball from both the field and from three, and he's only scoring about 14 points a night. While he is an objectively solid defender out on the perimeter, he's going down the Patrick Beverley route of bringing attention to himself because of his mouth more than his play. Up next is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the most overrated player there is Rudy Gobert. Gobert was brought to Minnesota with the goal of giving their defense a boost and elevating themselves to contender status, and they did so by trading away almost every draft pick and asset they had. But as the end of the season approaches, he has yet to prove worthy of that kind of price tag. He's still one of the better rim protectors in the league, but at 30 years old, he's starting to show signs of slowing down.
Yeah, he's DeAndre Jordan.
Next up is the New Orleans Pelicans, and their most overrated player is Zion Williamson. I have to come clean and admit that I've contributed to the overrating of Zion because I can't help but be mesmerized by his dominance when he's healthy and playing, but the fact of the matter is that thus far he just can't be trusted to stay healthy, and you can't be considered one of the best players in the league if you're only playing 30 games a year. Next up, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, and their most overrated player is Lu Dort. Dort is a great story. He's an easy player to root for, and he's objectively good and helpful for this young Thunder team on the rise. He's very similar to Avery Bradley, who was a good perimeter defender that got a bit overrated in that regard, and then offensively, Dort is far too inconsistent and inefficient to be trusted to playmake regularly. Next up is the Phoenix Suns, and their most overrated player is DeAndre Ayton. Ayton had a very strong playoff run 2 years ago, helping the Suns make the finals, and got anointed as the next great center on the rise, but since then, it's debatable.
I feel, you know, my old head self feels bad for saying this, but I think if you're labeled the point guard and you don't have a championship ring, that's all I'm going to say.
whether or not he's
all I'm gonna
even
say.
improved at all, and after also being paid a max contract this offseason, he hasn't lived up to the elevated expectations. He's effective in the mid-range, has nice touch around the basket, he rebounds well, and plays above average defense, but he can shrink in big moments and has a reputation for being a bit soft. Up next, we have the Portland Trail Blazers, and their most overrated player is Anfernee Simons. The Blazers started the season red-hot shooting the ball and were firmly in the playoff race, but as the season has progressed, they've slipped further and further down the standings, and it's because guys like Simons have regressed back to the mean. He's a promising young shooter that loves to launch threes, but defensively he's a nightmare.
I'm gonna tell you what. Portland Trail Blazers, they need to trade Damian this offseason. They need to, because Anfernee was good when he wasn't playing with Damian, at least last season. I haven't really watched him with Portland this season, but, got Shaedon Sharpe. I think Shaedon Sharpe's like the next Tracy McGrady or Vince Carter maybe, but get as many assets for Damian while you can right now. They're not going to win the ring with them. Just do that and build around those two players and whatever players you get for Damian. They just need to do that.
And isn't quite ready to be a go-to option for a playoff team yet. Next up is the Sacramento Kings, and their most overrated player is Kevin Huerter. I'll be honest, it was hard to find a truly overrated player on the Kings with how well the team has been playing this season, so Huerter kind of got the nod by default. He played a big role in the Hawks' run to the conference finals a few years ago, and while his ability to serve as a knockdown shooter and valuable secondary scoring threat, I've seen a few instances of him being ranked amongst the best young guards in the league, when realistically he's at least a tier below those guys. Up next is the San Antonio Spurs, and their most overrated player is Keldon Johnson. This is another example of a team being difficult to pick an overrated player from, but Johnson's production has skyrocketed this year now that he's the #1 option. The Spurs are tanking for Victor Wembanyama, and Johnson has definitely taken promising strides forward, but it's difficult for me to truly buy into the numbers that he's putting up because they're pretty...
What's up, Spurs fans? You guys already had Tim Duncan. Okay, it's our turn. You guys had Tim Duncan. It's our turn. Okay, we get the dominant big man. You guys have had Tim Duncan. You had him for 97 years.
Hollow given the circumstances. He can freely shoot the ball at will because of the lack of expectations, so we'll see how he fares moving forward as the Spurs bounce back. And finally, the last team in the Western Conference is the Utah Jazz, and their most overrated player is Jordan Clarkson. Clarkson's been a solid sixth man for most of his career, and this year he earned a starting spot on the team, which has resulted in him scoring a career-high 20 points per game. The ball is in his hands more, and he's shooting more shots per game than he ever has, so this was bound to happen. But it doesn't necessarily mean he's better now that he's still shooting the ball below league average from the field and from three.
Alright guys, that is the end of the video right there, man. This is definitely a fun video. Hey, it's Avery Bradley. Okay, that's all we got. Thank y'all so much for watching. Peace out, my friends.